Welcome back for one more conversation about how artists look at works from the past with fresh perspectives, especially necessary when we are looking at work across differences in social norms and historical conditions. This week we met with Kirsten Lepore, a Los Angeles-based director and animator, and an alumna of the MFA program in experimental animation at CalArts. You can learn more about Kirsten at the end of this video. Now, let's join her in her studio to discuss the work that she chose, Max Fleischer's 1932 cartoon, Minnie the Moocher.
I think that piece has always just been super exciting and inspiring to me, especially as something that's as early as it is in animation history, mainly because it's so crazy. Mm-hmm. I love how they use this sort of classic rubber hose style of animation where things can kind of be like boneless in a way, where anything can move and everything has, like, not only does it move, but the movement style is very, it's just very diverse. Like, it can go from anything from like noodly to rigid to like things pop into other things. And I just find that really inspiring, how wacky they got with their animation.
Yeah, I think as early as it is, there's some things about it that seem still really unsettling. I mean, I've watched it several times over the last week, and like, if I had bad dreams at night, it's like you wake up and you're in a Fleischer cartoon. But also, sort of, you can already feel things being deeply conventionalized. And you mm-hmm. mentioned that it's not Disney, and that's already one of the things that animators are reacting to, mm-hmm. even as it ends in a like really conventional chase scene where all the crazy nightmarish figures go after mm-hmm. Betty Boop and Bimbo.
There are just so many things to read into in that cave too. Like on top of the ghouls and everything, there's just like crazy references to everything. On top of like the drug references happening with the Cab Calloway character that's rotoscoped. And
the two things I think are really interesting to me in that regard is, like, we're in the 1930s,
yeah.
and so we're between World War I
mm-hmm.
And World War II, and as much as that's a tense time in the United States in terms of race relations, and mm-hmm. that's one of the things that, you know, sort of haunts this film in some ways, it's also a tense time in the world in terms of mm-hmm. race relations.
Yeah.
And the Fleischers are Eastern European immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Hitler's coming down
mm-hmm.
the pipeline, and the whole question of whose nightmare it is
yeah.
is really complicated.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot of different types of characters, which I appreciate about the Fleischer's work, is you don't get that sort of homogenous set of characters that you'd sometimes get from Disney cartoons. But at the same time, yeah, there is that sort of like being at home with your people and everything else is the other. Yeah. You know, whether it's the ghoulish characters representing whoever else people weren't familiar with that moved into their neighborhood or whatnot.
One of the things that interests me about animation is it is the opportunity to create your whole world.
Mm-hmm.
That it really is kind of an empty cell, page, mm-hmm. computer screen, tabletop, however you want to think about it.
Exactly.
And you have to figure out every element
mm-hmm.
in it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, that's also true of painting in some ways, but in mm-hmm. a painting, everything stays still.
Yeah.
And in an animation, everything has the potential to move.
Mm-hmm.
So there's not a really fine line between what's sentient or living in the world and so is moving, mm-hmm. and what is moving because it's a part of the story.
I feel like that's maybe one of my favorite things about this animation, is because everything can kind of become sentient and then go back mm-hmm. to being inanimate. And yeah, there are just tons of, you know, from the beginning, I think Betty's crying and upset, and then this flower on the table comes to life and talks to her, but then goes back to being a flower. And then later on, you know, she's writing her letter when she wants to run away from home, and the drops of ink coming out of the inkwell come to life twice and hop back in, and then another character comes out and hops back in. And yeah, it's just like that sense of anything being able to be alive in this world that you create is so exciting as an animator, and just sort of has always reminded me of that fact that you create your own world and nothing's off limits, basically.
The cartoon starts with live action with Cab Calloway,
yeah.
who's just amazing performing Minnie the Moocher. And the Fleischer Brothers, and you have to explain this to me because I don't completely understand, but the Fleischer mm-hmm. Brothers invented a technique called rotoscoping. So mm-hmm. they actually sort of rotoscoped him to turn him into the walrus-y kind of ghosty thing that does. And that's almost like early motion capture in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so it's basically this technique where you're taking live action footage and I mean, now rotoscoping is a lot easier because you can just digitally bring something in and sort of trace over it in the computer. But back then, I think they were using a lot of techniques where they might have been projecting that footage and then animating over it, or using film strips. Like, there's a bunch of different ways to do it. But the other thing that I love about how the Fleischer Brothers approach rotoscoping, which I think is often overlooked like nowadays, which is kind of disheartening, but like back then, they didn't just want to rotoscope this human figure exactly the way it was, but just simplified. Instead, they took the motion as someone would motion capture, but instead created this entire character that looked nothing like a human and was constantly morphing, but still kept that essence of human movement that was so interesting. And I love that they sort of broke the mold constantly, but still kept that movement. I think that's so cool and exciting and different.
And so it creates this kind of, you're in the real world when you're watching Cab Calloway. That's, you know, film in its traditional way. And then you go into Betty Boop's world at her dining room table with her mother and her father. And then her father's head, as he's kind of scolding her, turns into a gramophone.
Yeah.
And you're in almost this other world within the animated world. So you kind of constantly go from some version of kind of a kind of concrete realness to some version of an animated realness to some place completely different. And there's not a real strong dividing line between any of them. Then because of the rotoscoping, the real world is almost brought in that way too.
It's just totally playing with the boundaries of the real and then the completely constructed.
I want to ask you a question about stop motion, because that's mostly what you're doing.
My specialty, I'd
your
say.
specialty. And it seems to me, as opposed to 2D animation, where you start sort of with a blank slate and everything can move in potential, stop motion is almost much closer to still life painting, where you start with everything's dead in a way.
I never thought of it that way. Yeah.
And you have to decide what gets to be animated.
Oh, interesting. I like that a lot, actually. I never thought of it that way. With any type of animation, everything is, I mean, nothing is obviously alive. You're kind of like, you're animating it, you're bringing it to life. But yeah, it's nice that in stop motion, you're working with physical objects.
Right.
And there is that weird potential to bring something that could literally have once been living and then die back to life, like in a very creepy way. I mean, you know, things like animators like Svankmajer and a lot of the like Eastern European animators kind of specialized in that, where they would, you know, buy animal organs and stuff like that and use them for animation. But yeah, there's this strange potential to sort of play God and create this universe where, anything can be moved in any way. It's tricky, I think, for any animator, not just stop motion animators, to figure out how simple to make things, how little to do, how much to do. Because there could come a point when there's too much motion, and then it's just too much for a viewer to absorb. But then, I don't know, sometimes things could be too simple and things aren't stimulating enough, so it's a difficult balance.
And then oftentimes it seems like, to go back to Disney just a little bit, sort of either certain studios or certain artists start to impose their own kinds of conventions. So if the characters have to function more as actors, then they're distorted less, for example, as opposed to like the Fleischers, who almost everybody is, as you say, kind of rubber noodly or you know, incredibly elastic, and emotion is expressed by extremes of distortion or fragmentation or metamorphosis. And you don't see that so much in Snow White, for example.
And that's actually something that I'm super passionate about in my own work as an animator, is the concept that you can take advantage of these metamorphoses. And I think that people should. Like, it's almost a little disappointing when an animator doesn't take advantage of things like metamorphosis in animation, because it is one of the sort of liberating qualities of the medium. Whereas with something like full animation, like Snow White with Disney, they just completely forget about those principles when they could really be used very effectively as story devices and emotional devices.
I wonder about how you think about that in the development of your characters, you know, how they become specific without becoming cruel, I guess.
Like for me, being a stop motion animator, I am performing through my puppet, sort of. So the puppet it's kind of like I'm the actor as the animator, because I am creating a performance that is sort of, it's like on a way slower time base, or I'm doing a performance frame by frame, but it's still my acting performance through this puppet. I feel like most of the time, actually, I don't really have control over it. It's sort of, it's a combination of what comes naturally, but also in a way where your puppet wants to go. And this is a whole school of thought just in stop motion animating, where some people will, for example, pre-drill holes in the ground for where their character is going to walk, because you always have to tie the character down to the floor. And some people will pre-drill their holes, and they'll be like, this is the exact path that my puppet is going to follow through this scene. And then there's the other school of thought where it's, you kind of start animating, you see where your puppet wants to go, where the performance is going, which is a little more improvisational, and then you drill the holes as they're about to take a step, which is what I do. I like to kind of let things go where they take me, and I like to have still a little bit of spontaneity and improvisation with such a rigid medium that usually is so based in planning.
Talk to me a little bit about how you see Betty Boop as a drawn animation.
Yeah, she's a really strange character. Yeah, with that weird egg head kind of shape with the hair. I mean, I see where her sort of 20s style influence comes in, and I really think she's still one of those characters that has such a strange and unique sense of design that, you know, especially for a female character that's supposed to be very sexy in her body, but has such a strange looking head.
Right, like her whole body is in her head in some ways.
So it's like
moving on a little tripod.
But she's both cute and innocent, but at the same and young, sort of, in that in Minnie the Moocher. But incredibly sexualized at the same time. But I kind of appreciate that she is so many things rolled into one, and just a strange little package.
So, and it ends with that chase scene, and then she goes home. And almost when I was watching it today, I was almost like, well, maybe they just had to have the chase scene, because if you went any deeper into the cave, you would never come out.
Yeah, it's just too terrifying. It is sort of creating this crazy cave of like psychological terrors, you know, like almost, I don't know, reflecting on whatever's maybe going on in Betty Boop's mind, or whatever was happening in the climate of the time, politically or socially. You definitely get a sense of that tension from things like that in the cartoons.
I think that's why it might resonate so much over the years, is because you would expect, you know, Betty Boop to have ended up in a nightclub, especially with the Cab Calloway song, and sort of whole Minnie the Moocher narrative, and yet she ends up in this cave where just about every social tension and terror comes at her all at once. And I think even the electrocution sequence is also deeply disturbing. And this notion that what's in there is mortality in every form.
Like, even looking at it being a cartoon for not just adults but also for children, I think it's interesting that the cartoons were so dark but still like so beloved to all those families. And I think that's also, like, just my personal opinion, I think that's something that we've lost a little bit from current things, because I think, you know, now things are, I mean, maybe not as tumultuous, but tumultuous in a totally different way, you know, just with everything happening in the world. And I feel like you don't get that same commentary from something as seemingly innocuous as a cartoon, whereas back then, you were getting a lot of this and kind of like just resonating what everyone was feeling at the time. And I feel like, you know, even as a kid's cartoon, I feel like kids could handle that and could definitely perceive that, but I think it maybe awakened them more to the reality of what was going on, which is sometimes a healthy thing, you know.
I wonder how scarable children are anymore these days, which is part of it too. I think we acclimate them to violence much younger in a way, and so the sort of normalness of it is it displaces the unsettlingness of it. And then you wonder what fairy tales have to teach our children. And even Bottle is sad in a way that an old fairy tale is. And beautiful and yet not conventionally rewarding.
I think that's a good way to look at it. Not conventionally rewarding, for sure. But I don't like doing the conventional happy endings. Like, I've never really believed in that kind of filmmaking, because I feel like it's, I don't want to say unrealistic, because I think, I mean, I'm an optimist, and I feel like I have a very happy life on the whole, but I feel like in terms of telling a story or talking about a character, there's never like an end point where everything ends and then everything is happy. It's sort of like life continues, and then you continue to have ups and downs. So for me, I mean, I like to sort of tell that story in my own films. But yeah, even looking back at the Fleischer stuff, I feel like it definitely has those ups and downs, which is maybe also why I'm sort of unconsciously attracted to it in a way. Yeah, because it has everything. It has like sexy, cute, innocent, weird character Betty Boop, but then it also has like horror and like real things in the world, and I like that interplay. I think it's kind of healthy to expose all of those things and to have all of those things out there.